Welcome, everyone. I'm Sherry Bailey. I'm the person that schedules adult programs. And this one is part of our local history series, but it's kind of a departure. We normally have a speaker, and this time we're going to have singers. Hey! I want to welcome you all and request, if you don't mind, to please fill out one of our evaluation forms on the back table when the program is over. That's one of the ways we keep track of whether you like what we're doing or would you have suggestions for other programs, things like that. That's really all I have to say, so let me introduce our players tonight. The director of our program is Elizabeth Ives. She's president of our board of trustees, has a theater background, and she's running this show. Eric Stern is at our reference desk. Jack Roblard's another of our trustees. Brenda Lockwood is our bookkeeper, accountant, miscellaneous runner of many things in the back room. And Meryl Zussman's head of PR and technology. You'll notice that it's quite diverse. Oh, I'm sorry. And Carol, Carol Park.
Because I just heard one, could we ask you to make sure your cell phones are turned off because they might be in a different key than Thank you so much for coming. We're glad to share our wonderful story. Of church and state, in a time when the king was head of both, when few could vote and the aristocrats filled government positions.
In 1612, Scotsmen went from Argyllshire in Scotland to settle in Ulster, Ireland. Their land was taken from the Irish Catholics by the Protestant British King James I and given to the Scot Presbyterians for helping to suppress a Catholic rebellion. 75 years later, the tables were turned. The Scots were caught in a bloody battle for the crown between a Catholic deposed king, James II, and Protestant Church of England monarch, King William of Orange.
James MacGregor was 11 years old when his family moved from Scotland to Londonderry, Ireland. He was at the Londonderry garrison in 1688 for the terrible 105-day siege by the James II forces, witnessed the systematic murder of all Protestants outside the garrison walls. He watched severed heads as they were kicked down the streets and hung on spikes. Even after they had eaten their horses and had no water left, the defenders pledged that no man, under pain of death, should speak of surrendering the city. The Londonderry garrison held. James II was defeated, and religious freedom for Protestants was preserved.
But the Scots in Ireland were surrounded by resentful Irish. The Scots held their land lease from the crown, not as outright owners. They were taxed heavily to support the Church of England, and their own Presbyterian ministers were stripped of their positions unless ordained by the Church of England. By 1718, the suppression of their lives became untenable. By oppressions, woes, and pains, by your sons in servile chains, we will drain our dearest veins, but they shall be free. Lay the proud usurpers low, tyrants fall in every foe.
Plymouth Puritans had done a century before, they decided to leave all they had known and worked for to come to the New World. The night before sailing, the courageous defender of Londonderry, now an adult, Reverend James McGregor, encouraged them.
We go to avoid oppression and cruel bondage, to shun persecution, to have the opportunity of worshiping God according to the dictates of conscience.
Families with James McGregor as their pastor. They walked up from Haverhill to land deeded to them by John Wainwright, whose grandfather had bought it from the Indians. It was land of rolling meadows and primeval woods, birches, walnuts, chestnuts, hazelnuts, and so they called it Nutfield. They chose to settle in the double range on the meadows lining West Running Brook, just below where Humphrey Road is now. Each family got a parcel 500 feet wide and running back from the brook to make 60 acres. From the top of the slope, you could see mountains and a beaver pond. On Sunday, April 12, 1719, Reverend James McGregor preached the first sermon under a huge old oak tree near that beaver pond.
It was April. Maybe there was snow on the ground. They had to cut trees, build shelters, clear land. Too much work for the first year. So they cleared a common field. There were no Fairways apartments there then. They planted the first white potatoes in the New World. And they planted flax. Of course, they needed lumber for their homes, so a sawmill was built on Beaver Brook, about where Chase's Mill apartments are now. And to save a long walk for grinding grain, David Cargill was granted water rights for a grist mill up by Beaver Lake, and a fulling mill for cloth at Adams Pond. Well, other Scots soon joined them. In a very few months, there were 70 families here.
The first recorded town meeting was held November 9th, 1719, for the purpose of electing a moderator, clerk, and committee to manage the affairs of the town. Now, some land was better than others. Our stone walls are famous. So right away, the town fathers were involved in land evaluations and property taxes. At town meeting in June 1720,
we vote to build a small house of worship as near the center of the 105 lots now occupied as can be convenient. We propose it be 50 feet long, 45 feet broad, and so high as may be convenient for one set of galleries.
And so, the first community building was the first parish church, erected a few feet north of the present one. Shortly after the first harvest, a large group of Haverhill men arrived at Nutfield, prepared to mow and take away the grass from the meadow, as had been their custom. Well, a group of 4 or 5 Nutfielders met them to explain that these were now their fields. This was met with great derision, and the Haverhill men were prepared for mowing. Along came James McGregor, survivor of the Londonderry siege.
We are the proprietors of this grass. Our title is direct and perfect, and I order you off this land.
We've been here long before you. Out of the way, Irishman. Nothing saves you, sir, except your black coat.
Well, it won't save you, sir.
The Haverhill men beat a hasty retreat.
But conflicts with the surrounding settlements continued as Nutfield grew, and finally, Nutfield sought help from the Crown and Parliament they had tried to get away from. 1722. By the hand of King George of England to my beloved subjects, a specific tract of land and authority to incorporate a town under the name of Londonderry.
The charter also included some interesting provisions. That each landholder should pay a quit rent of 1 peck of potatoes every October 1st forever. It did not say to whom. All trees large enough for ship masts belong to the Crown. That every March they must meet and select town authorities. And every Wednesday in the week forever have a marketplace for the selling of goods and 2 annual fairs in October and May.
An old Indian named Ezekiel lived by a nearby pond, and he told the settlers about the salmon and shad runs at Amskag Falls. They had no coffee, tea, or chocolate for years in Nutfield. Their diet consisted mainly of bread and milk, hasty pudding, potatoes, and cider, and sowings.
Sowings. Take a quantity of bran or cornmeal and put to soak in a tub for a couple of weeks until fermented. Strain, skim off the starch, boil for a morning, turn out into coolers, eat with buttermilk.
They turned their flax into the finest linen in the colonies, where even George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had shirts made here.
To crack with our glasses in our hands and our work upon our back, and there's no trade among the Mac in either men nor Mac if it was not for the work of the weavers. If it was not for the weavers, what would they do? We wouldn't have a cloth made out of wool. We wouldn't have a coat neither black nor blue if it was not for the work of the weavers.
It may seem a very small effort at education to erect a log house 12 by 16 by 7 feet high, only for boys, in session 12 weeks a year in the winter. But it was the second community building, built near the church. Educating girls beyond what their mothers taught them would have to wait. James McGregor added to his pastor's fee by teaching.
The settlement grew and changed as people explored further territories. In 1741, Windham formed its own parish. Later, land was deeded to Salem and Derryfield. Some English settlers arrived, forming their own community along a range above the Beaver Pond, at a distance from the Scots.
Major John Pinkerton opened part of his home as the first store in 1750, selling goods from West India that he brought up from Newburyport and Haverhill. Sugar, molasses, snuff, tobacco, rums, spices, and a tavern opened.
A mile below, on Beaver Brook, there was a sawmill, a grist mill, wheelwright, and cabinet maker shops. John's brother James opened a store there, and a tavern was built in the lower village. The first road connected the upper and lower villages, and still does. But their lives were about to change drastically.
When British law would us enthrall, our country for defense did call. Then martial fire inspired us all. To arms we flew, and as a soldier, stand or fall, I went with you.
Come join hand in hand, brave Americans all, and rouse your bold hearts at fair liberty's call. No tyrannous acts shall suppress your just claim, or stain with dishonor America's name. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we'll live. Our purses are ready. Steady, boys, steady, not as slaves, but as free men. Our money will give.
General John Stark, hero of Bunker Hill and Bennington. General George Reed, Bunker Hill, Trenton, Valley Forge. And more men than any other town in the colonies answered the call.
Then join hand in hand, brave Americans all. By uniting we stand, by dividing we fall. In so righteous a cause, let us hope to succeed. For heaven approves of such generous deed. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we'll live. Our purses are ready. Steady, boys, steady, not as slaves, but as free men. Our money will give.
Matthew Thornton grew up here. He became a doctor, served as a town official, a colonel in the militia, and was a judge of the Superior Court. When New Hampshire's Provisional Convention elected him delegate to the Continental Congress, he had to close his court schedule before setting off to Philadelphia on October 26, 1776. Now, the rebellion had gone particularly badly that summer. Washington's forces were in retreat. Hoping to take advantage of the situation, the British government promised full amnesty to all rebels except George Washington and all men whose names appear on a certain treasonable declaration published in Philadelphia, July 4, 1776. A defiant Matthew Thornton arrived in Philadelphia November 3, 1776, and immediately signed that remarkable treasonable document. The declaration which ends, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor.
The war ended in 1781. 1783. Instructions to the Londonderry representatives in the General Court regarding amnesty for those who opposed the rebellion. We expect that you will use your best endeavors, that nothing may ever be done for those infernal wretches, that to provide a gallows, halter, and hangman for everyone that dare show their vile countenances among us.
Hail Columbia, happy land. Hail ye heroes, heaven-born band, who fought and bled in freedom's cause, who fought and bled in freedom's
number of years after the settlement of this town, there was no transportation other than by foot or horseback. It wasn't until the late 1790s that John Prentice astounded the population by appearing in a horse-drawn chaise.
What is that horse pulling?
That is an unjustifiable extravagance.
Who does he think he is?
Well, imagine their reaction when James Gregg appeared driving the first horse-drawn wagon 2 years later. And to add to the excitement that year, James Pinkerton donated the money to establish an academy to promote piety and virtue and educate youth in science, languages, and the liberal arts. The tuition, $2 a term. When more space was added in 1816, girls were allowed to attend. Separate classes, of course. But when girls' classes were discontinued 5 years later, Jacob Adams donated the money for the Adams Female Academy with dormitory, located on what is now Lane Road. The academy opened in 1824 at a cost of $1.50 per week room and board, and $6 for a 14-week term, which excluded December through March. Assistant Principal Mary Lyon later went on to form Mount Holyoke College.
Spinning wheels in almost every home still turned out the famed Londonderry linen. Neighbors met and shopped together at the Wednesday markets decreed by charter more than 100 years before, or met for community spectacles, such as the separation of the first parish church in 1822. The building was cut in half and pulled apart by oxen for the addition of 22 feet in the middle. Otherwise, social gatherings centered in people's parlors.
Those wagons and carriages created a need for roads. The Londonderry Turnpike from Concord to Massachusetts provided a link to the outside world. We now know it as Route 28 and the bypass. Derry Village became an economic center of town.
It was that turnpike that actually started the division in the area. In 1738, the town was divided into two parishes. The east, where the majority of the professional men lived and the elected officials lived, was called Derry Parish. And the west was called Londonderry Parish, which was more rural, a bunch of farmers. Now, town meetings in Derry have always been fairly contentious. Starting in 1825, those West Parish farmers started voting in a block to defeat the East Parish candidates. Something had to be done.
In March 1827, East Parish proposed a warrant that split the town and, to add insult to injury, even moved the boundary 1 mile west. Since only the state could incorporate towns, the West prevailed in voting to elect only 1 state representative instead of 3, a man who was opposed to the split. It was getting dark, so the meeting was adjourned to another day, and most Westerners left for the long walk home.
But the East Derry reconvened the meeting and voted to reconsider the vote. Candles were lit to count the ballots, in spite of the best efforts of the few remaining West Parish men to put out the candles. 2 more representatives were elected from the Derry parish. The state government approved the division of 2 towns. And soon after the separation, Derry became known for its enterprise in trade.
In 1849, the Manchester to Lawrence Railway was built in West Derry over strenuous objections.
The noise will drive everyone mad.
If the railroad comes through here, what about my hay and grain business? We're gonna kill all the horses?
Hens will refuse to lay eggs because of that noise.
Soon there were 3 trains a day through Derry, and it was the railroad that allowed one of the area's greatest benefactors to succeed. Harvey Pearlie Hood started his cattle and milk business in 1848, about where the common fields was. 10 years later, he moved to East Broadway and raised 6 children, including Gilbert H. Hood, Sr. Over the generations, this remarkable family acquired 360 acres, including 4 ponds for their herds, barns, creamery, and ice house. Land that included the present golf course, Hood Shopping Plaza, Grinnell, and Hood Schools. Even in the 1970s, you had to time your passage to and from town to accommodate the cattle crossings at the present golf course, mornings and evenings.
And the railroad brought current news to our town from the rest of the country, such as the instructions to New Hampshire's delegates to Congress in 1855 to use influence in any lawful way to prevent the incorporation of any more slave states into the Union and to secure the repeal of the fugitive slave law.
The echoes of the first gun that fired against Fort Sumter, April 12, 1861, were felt and heard throughout the country. Lieutenant George Upton joined Derry's fathers, sons, brothers, all listed on the statue in front of First Parish Church, and marched off to Virginia to preserve our Constitution of the United States of America, saying goodbye forever to all they loved and worked for.
We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more, from Mississippi's winding stream and from New England's shore. We leave our plows and workshops, our wives and children dear, with hearts too full for utterance, with but a silent tear. We dare not look behind us, but steadfastly before. We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more. We are coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more.
From the Diary of Mary Perkins, age 9.
My father is a soldier in the Union Army. My mother writes to him 2 or 3 times a week. It's my job to take the letters to the post office before school, because I'm the oldest. The post office is more than a mile that way from my house, and the school is that way. So I leave very early in the morning so as not to be late for school. It's worse in winter, not just because of the snow, but because it's so dark. I'm really scared of 3 things. wild animals because my brother said he saw lynx in the woods, and I heard Mrs. Adams say her nephew saw a panther up in Chester. Then there might be ghosts. A man hanged himself not a mile from my house. But the biggest thing I'm afraid of are the French wood choppers who are cutting down all the trees. If I go across the field, I pass another house, and I usually go that way. 2 days ago, when we didn't have school, and I didn't have to start so early, a man dropping off mail from the southbound train shouted that President Lincoln was shot last night in Ford's Theater and died this morning. I followed the postmaster into the store, and we all sat around the stove whilst he read the news to us. I stopped at all the houses on the way home, and then my mother sent me in the other direction too, to tell everybody the news.
After the Civil War, there was a profound change in the life of the area. From agriculture, people turned to industry. Colonel William Pillsbury had been manufacturing shoes in Londonderry for some years before moving to Derry, and the Pillsbury factories encompassed a large part of downtown Derry Depot. The new mill attracted many French-Canadian Catholics.
August 19, 1882 was warm, a little stiff breeze. About 3:30 in the afternoon, a fire started in the livery stable at what is now West Broadway and Martin Street. There was no fire department in town then, just volunteers. A call was sent to Manchester, and 30 minutes later, a train arrived bearing some men and a steam pumping engine called the Fire King. By the time the fire was out, 17 buildings had burned to the ground. The only good thing to come of that fire was the organization of a fire department in 3 districts: Derry Depot, Derry Village, and East Derry.
But the businessmen were risk takers, and they lived in town. They rebuilt. If there'd been a Chamber of Commerce or Downtown Development Committee in the late 1880s, here's what they might have boasted.
Hood Farm, Ice House, B.F. Pettingill, dealer in pumps, windmills, hydraulics. G.F. Putnam, groceries, fancy cakes, cigars and tobacco, ginger beer, near the schoolhouse.
Pillsbury and Palmerton general merchandise. Everything agreeable to the taste, comfortable to the body, profitable, beneficial, and at the lowest figures for cash. Great markdowns at Bradford's Emporium in children's shoes. Lafayette Mineral Spring Water for a full line of soda fountain articles, tonics, and ginger ale.
Hay, grain, and coal at Holmes and Wheeler. Charles Bartlett's birthday cards just received from Boston. Violin, strings, school books. For the latest style of linen goods or a good suit of clothes, call on F.A. Palmer. It'll be time well spent.
Wheelwright and Carriage Factory, Bell's Opera House, heavy teaming and trucking, barrel making, butchering of all kinds, harness maker, the Derry News, drugstore, railroad house hotel, livery and boarding stable, Derry Electric Light Company.
Colonel Frederick Shepard and William Pillsbury had a dream: an electric railroad from Derry to Chester. September 1898 marked the beginning of a 32-year connection of those towns. The trolley took people from Beaver Lake Pavilion for Saturday night dances. Carried the trunks of summer boarders who were vacationing at the lake, mail and express packages between the two towns. People could sit at home and, by watching the rise and fall of their electric lights, tell how far the trolley had gone.
No doubt people of our towns greeted the new century noisily and enthusiastically, but for a while their lives went on as before. Shoe manufacturing was still the largest industry in town.
Women still couldn't vote and earned only about a third as much as men, although they did make inroads in the teaching profession and were gradually challenging men in other professions, following in the footsteps of Mary Danforth, an 1869 graduate of Pinkerton. She became one of America's first female doctors and the first woman member of the New Hampshire Medical Society. Our traffic circle is named for her.
There were 3 theaters downtown where you could see plays, concerts, minstrel shows, or movies.
You could go for a ride on a trolley up to Beaver Lake or Chester. Baseball was big. Enjoy the winter carnivals, toboggan or ski down the hill where exit 4 is now. There was horse racing on Birch Street, winter sulky racing on Beaver Lake. Of course, everyone went to Pinkerton's sporting events. And there was a steamboat on Island Pond.
There were 2 important events for old Nutfield in 1900. The first was a harbinger of changes our town could not imagine. William Reserve made the first automobile in Derry. Although he had no formal education after he was 17, this remarkable inventor could have qualified as a mechanic or electrical engineer, millwright, architect, carpenter, or musician. He worked for H.P. Hood as supervisor of the machinery in the silos and ice house. His first car used a 2-cylinder gas engine built for boats. He developed a steam-powered truck and a rotary snow remover.
The second event, unmarked at the time, left a legacy of literature for the world. Derry 1900 basically offered either farming or a job in the shoe industry. It was not a center to attract a poet. But Robert Frost came here to farm. What would those 16 first settlers have thought of this dreaming, creative, difficult man who tried to adjust his cow's milking schedule to his own, spent months with Pinkerton students analyzing Palgrave's golden treasure, and hours of precious time just walking in the woods and exploring the meadows.
Stopping here to watch his woods fade.
Books were a luxury for most people in those days. Up until 1877, libraries were in private homes, privileges limited to stockholders at $2 per share. That year, Harriet Taylor donated $1,000 for a library in the Upper Village Hall. The Adams Memorial Building of 1905 provided space for town offices, the police department and jail, a large performance hall where town meetings were held, and, by donation from R.W. Pillsbury, Derry Public Library. In 1927, Mrs. Henry McGregor gave the town the gift of Derry Library in the Park that honors her husband. It contained 1,229 books, magazines, and newspapers. The circulation of 10,000 materials in under 6 months certainly proved the need for libraries in the community. So much so that it encouraged Frederick Shepherd to donate the present East Derry Library 2 years later.
The first half of the 20th century saw many more changes to our community and our society. The town kept growing and many roads were added. Women finally got the right to vote, and our town sent young men off to fight the war to end all wars.
We survived the Great Depression in spite of the shoe factories threatening to close and more people on welfare when the banks closed in 1933. But then discovered that World War I wasn't to end all wars. Once again, our men and women fought to avoid oppression and cruel bondage, to shun persecution, to have the opportunity of worshiping according to the dictates of conscience, to live free or die. They came back from Europe and the Pacific to a booming post-war economy.
May 1960, employees of the Chelmsford Shoe Factory had just left for the day when the fire broke out. Within an hour, the factory, 4 tenement buildings, a dozen houses, and a store were rubble. The fire changed the downtown and marked the beginning of the end of Derry's shoe industry.
1 year later, Derry's own Commander Alan Shepard made America's historic flight into space.
And then the surveyors came, followed by the woodsmen and loggers, followed by bulldozers and graders. Old Nutfield was changed forever. Route 93 was here, and the shopping malls followed.
This is our inherited legacy. 16 families, a unique, homogeneous group bound by their heritage, their faith, their determination to avoid oppression and cruel bondage.
John Stark, challenging us all to live free or die. Death is not the worst of evils.
Matthew Thornton, pledging his life, his fortune, his sacred honor.
The risk takers, benefactors, and educators, women and men of the Pinkerton, Pillsbury, Adams, Hood, and Shepherd families.
The farmers, investors, scientists, and poets.
A journey from one town to 6, from 44 people to almost 34,000, from one religion to many, from the plow to the automobile, from the first telephone at Hood Farm to email and the internet, from Wednesday markets to shopping centers and malls, from a one-room schoolhouse to a multitude of grade schools, middle schools, private schools, and a high school, from an abundant environment to the protection of our wetlands, meadows, and woodlands. In 2019, we will be 300 years old. The challenge is ours.
Tis the gift to be simple, tis the gift to be free, tis the gift
very much for coming. We're delighted to share our story. I need to tell you something. We'd be delighted also to answer any questions you have. Where we got this material, the town historian is sitting right there. He took notes. We may correct some things. I took a little literary license.
He never does.
That's right. The music, Carol helped me immeasurably on the music, and I have to tell you this. When we were talking about the music, I asked her because I knew that there were a number of Robert Frost poems that had been put to music, but I didn't know how to find them. And I said to Carol, do you have any music? Carol spent years in the public school system, so she has a library of her own at home. She said, funny you should ask that. She said when she was working, 5th grade, did you do?
I had music at Derry Village School.
At Derry Village School. She wrote the music for Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Day.
This evening would not be complete without acknowledging Ms. Elizabeth Ives for her tremendous.
Around and acknowledge these 3 staff. Because you see what talent we have here. We're very proud of our staff. So we're ready to go on the road. We are a little early. If anybody has any questions, we'd be glad to answer them. Yes?
Do you have any plans to go to the schools?
Pardon me?
Do you have any plans to take your act to the schools?
You just made some for us.
I know a church that would love to have it.
She is the pastor of First Parish Church. I want to tell you all that all of the material is in our collection upstairs. Most of what I used came from the material you can borrow. And there are numerous librarians here who will help you find them. Sherry among them. But anyway, you can borrow it. Also, the music. There are a lot of books of music. I found out something. I never knew I thought Stephen Foster was Southern. I mean, he writes Southern songs, right? Well, he wasn't. So we have books of Stephen Foster's music. We also have the New Hampshire History Room, and you can't take anything out. But there are wonderful maps in there that you can get, the old maps, and a lot of other material, which again, our wonderful staff will help you find. So the other, some music I got at the Manchester Library, but we have a lot here. So thank you.
I'd also like to mention something I just found out today, that it is the anniversary of President Lincoln being shot this evening. And I was amazed that I was speaking about that on the anniversary. So,
And it wasn't planned?
no. Charlie?
No, I was going to suggest that just in case there might be people in the room who aren't familiar with Dick Holmes' books, might mention what they are and their availability here at the library.
They are available, and in fact, we sell 2 of them here. Help me out. I know
Derry Revisited.
Derry Revisited, and what's the other one?
Nutfield Rambles.
Nutfield Rambles. Great stories in there. Derry Revisited takes it past where we stopped when 93 came in. Oh, please. But we stopped there. But Derry Revisited takes it past that time and tells some wonderful stories a little bit later. Anyway, those are up there too. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.